So there's this theme that I think of in the phrase impulses and echoes. And I guess a really simple way of understanding this is if you take a rock and you throw it into calm water, there's a big splash and then there are ripples that go out. And if you were to look at this in slow motion, you'd see that the highest wave is the closest to the rock. And then as it goes out, the ripples, they diminish in height. And there are troughs and there are peaks, but the peaks diminish in height as you get further from the rock, or where the rock was thrown in, because the rock's underwater. So whenever I experience an impulse, there are waves, and I'm not alone in this. I should say when one impulse experiences an impulse, there are waves in terms of revelation. And I guess I won't say all that. I was thinking about saying something. So one of the echoes from this really long video I made this morning, as I'm trying to go about my business, is the thought of the Lord on the cross and how in the midst of his physical affliction, he had the deep compassion to look at his mom and John the Revelator, who were there at the foot of the cross, and to tell John to look after his mom. And I think that maybe that's the easiest to see, deepest manifestation of, if you had to take one thing from Jesus's life and say, can you describe the love of God in one act? And you could look at that, the crucifixion, and say, well, a lot of people were killed like that. I mean, if Jesus was a special person, that's one thing, but he didn't die in a special way. I mean, even amongst however many people the Romans crucified, surely there was more than one innocent person. I mean, innocent maybe of the crime, Jesus was completely innocent, but okay, let's go with that. I think there's some validity to that point. What made the cross what it was for Jesus? It wasn't about the cross. It wasn't about the crucifixion. It was about everything else. That was the distinguishing feature. It's so interesting how holiness is such a deep thing. It's such a deep inside of you question. And short of discernment from God, it's really hard to find out, both in yourself and in someone else. Jesus's life was a demonstration, and it was a demonstration on many levels, so that no matter who was there, think of it like the sun shining on the earth. So many things don't have a concept of the sun, right? And we, a scientist, physicist, an astrophysicist is going to have a very different concept of the sun compared to a little child. A little child is going to have a concept that varies significantly from a sunflower, and a sunflower is going to vary significantly from a rock. But all of them interact with the sun. And when we're talking about the Son of God, or any manifestation of God's light, this is true, right? So the phrase that I think of is, if you can't tell, my mind works in themes. But the anchoring theme for this for now, for me, is different responses to the same manifestation, right? So, a lot of these don't even see what's going on or understand any of it. They just react to the form of in the case of the solar sun energy, right, radiation, and grass doesn't think of a burning orb in the center of the solar system, but it grows. It produces chlorophyll from that energy, and everything that eats plants, and you can just go through the whole cycle with this. And even the earth itself, a lot of the electromagnetism that is so important to so many things here is fully dependent on the sun. So when Jesus came, his manifestation was not received equally. I will also say, just for the sake of stating truth, it was not received fully by anyone at that time. But that's for another day to explore. So his being on the cross was I'm going to use this word crude, and I mean that in the literary sense, vulgar, profane, commonly visible, commonly understandable. It was the most crude way that God could show his love to the world. But the thing about low resolution is you can't go lower in resolution without losing value. So the most valuable components of the Lord's demonstration were not visible to the people who were there. Okay, let's not make this a 2.5-hour video, Rob. One reason that I derive so much value out of thinking about the Lord on the cross and how he acted there and what he went through there is because of what I understand about what was not visible that he was carrying there. That was much heavier than a wooden cross and hurt much more than nails through his flesh or even whips across his back. But I came to know those things through the gateway of the physical demonstration. And the real cross that Jesus bore didn't start after his show trial. It started the moment he was born. And that is a story that has to be told in greater resolution than it's ever been told. And I guess that's not going to happen here and now. But there's a reason I'm going into this, and it's an echo from this morning's video. Although I don't know when I'm going to post this. I don't even know what today's date is. What year is it? Just kidding. So the reason I'm bringing this up, let's hope I can dovetail this quickly, is the visible burdens that you carry in the name of the Lord, their value is not just a function of what other people see in that burden. The closer you draw to God, the greater the proportion of what will not be seen by others, or it will be seen by fewer, or it will be seen by fewer as fully. Because in short, it takes one to know one. And we're called up higher. Jesus said that he came down to be lifted up by men on the cross so that he could lift all men to the Father. And so as we are called through the gate of the visible demonstration of his suffering and his love, because what is love? Love is, how would you measure love? That's the formulated question. One of the keys to receiving revelation is caring. If you don't care, you're not going to know. The other key, is formulating the question correctly. And I don't mean correctly in the sense of like a math quiz. I mean efficaciously. So what is the formulation of a question that yields the information sought according to the laws established in heaven? which sounds super complicated, but you can become extraordinarily fluent in this, just like any other language. You don't have to think about it. It just comes straight out of your heart. So, and just like any other language, the best way to learn is immersion. And you pray and you say, Lord, bless me that nothing will impede the sincerity of my heart. And that's another key to revelation, is sincerity. It's so important. That's where the intent comes in and connects. It's a gate, and it opens the windows of heaven. Anyway, so Jesus on the cross. The heavier burden was not visibly demonstrated. And of all the people there, John was most familiar with the invisible portion of what Jesus carried, but he was still very much a neophyte. So even a light external burden could be massively greater, both in the sense of the perceived weight of the carrier, and also in terms of the joy in heaven that comes from the person's willingness to bear it. All right, well, what do I mean by that? Let me tell a story that's completely secular to illustrate the point. Once, I was driving down the road and I saw an empty wheelchair on the side of the road, and all of a sudden, like my brain, this is all boom, 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 real quick. My brain saw a guy on the ground in an empty wheelchair beside him. And my instant thought was, holy cow, I gotta help this guy. And so just before, it was almost involuntary, I started pulling over. But then even, also very quickly, I saw this guy, I saw like, my brain then saw this patch of bare ground and a pile of weeds. And this guy who was paralyzed from the waist down was on the ground pulling weeds. And it affected me deeply. It was just so noble. I don't know. I just have these videos are going to give you the idea that I'm some sort of weeping sissy. I'm just focusing on the things that, the resonant frequencies, so to speak. I'm not throwing out some new agey stuff. And analogously, there's one frequency that'll break a glass, and no other frequency will cause that to happen. And I'm focusing on those frequencies in these videos, so to speak, topically. But honestly, I don't really care what people think. But just so, if we ever meet face to face and you realize that my in-person personality differs wildly. And part of that too is that, do you know why gold is gold and silver is silver? It's really interesting. I have this in a book, but who knows when it's going to come out. But materials absorb frequencies, wavelengths, light, and they emit frequencies. And a lot of scientists talk about this as reflectiveness. They absorb some and reflect others, and that's not strictly true. They absorb energy and they emit energy, and there's a transformation in there. Anyway, so silver reflects all visible wavelengths pretty well and equally. See, now I just did it. So it emits pretty close to what it receives, and so that's why it's used for mirrors, because what you get out is what you put in. But gold doesn't do that. It emits a concentration around the color gold and absorbs more of the other colors than it emits. So it turns out that when you're in the presence of other people, a person can also be like that, and they can be reactive to the environment. And I will tell you, there are so many things in this world today that have been prepared for a special time, being the end times, being the time that we're in. And one of those, and all of them have immense downsides, which is why they were withheld until now. And the cost benefit changes in the end times because none of us are going to be here anyway, so to speak. Some of us, in fact, will be here, but this world will not. Babylon will not be. Anywho, with digital technology, we have these things that I've spoken about before, like ghosting people and these terrible, porn, all these other terrible things. But the little sliver of benefit that's absolutely necessary. So someone that can make a video without being impeded the way they would if they're face to face with someone, because they're free of the limitations that person would impose. And then the truth can go full blast to the world without a filter. And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, it comes with some really heavy consequences, but those are necessary. Let's trace back. So anyway, so I saw this paralyzed guy picking weeds. And for me, that was a resonant frequency, so to speak, because I have a soft spot for nobility. And when I saw that guy doing that, I thought I said, this is something to remember. This is really something. And I've told some of you about when I came face to face with a lion, on the other side of a fence. It wasn't in the wild or something. There aren't lions in the wild. Most people don't realize that. It's really sad, but it's true. They're all in game parks and zoos. That was also a massive demonstration of nobility. I don't know what there is like that in this world. Anyway, I'll spare you all the analogous connections that just came into my mind with that. But anyway, why did I bring up the guy pulling weeds? Shoot. The day's wearing on and my brain is waning. I'm sorry. I'll remember after this, and then there will be another blip, another reducing peak, and I'll have to make another video. The larger portion of the burden that Jesus bore, it wasn't physical. And, that's why. Great. Okay, so if a random dude was out pulling weeds, I wouldn't have said, like, man, I need to remember this for years to come. This is a glorious thing, like a work of art that I want to hang on my wall. So I see this all the time and remember that. And that's something to aim for, that I could be like that somehow. But God is so good at sprinkling his goodness all over life, and we're just so blind all the time. Anyway, but his situation is what made it noble. And the adversity he was working against made picking weeds a noble thing. So what weeds are in your life that you could pick that would be a noble thing to pick given your circumstances? And that's a super private question because it goes over this boundary of things no one else is going to know, but God knows. And as you give your life to him and you dedicate yourself to his purposes, he'll lead you straight into those things. Those are the things he's going to ask you to do, and don't be dismayed by the seeming invisibility of what you do. Not that you're going to do it to be seen, because you're not, but your greatest desire will be that somehow, in some way, you can reflect some degree of God's goodness to other people so that they see it more than they otherwise would, somehow. And that's the desire that all of us have who love the Lord. So, echoing the theme of the other video, as you're going through rough things, have you ever wondered why the afflictions in the Bible are these externally tangible things. Like everybody knew what Job was going through. Job didn't have like this hidden portion of his trial, right? Everyone knew what his kids were like and that they all got killed, and they knew he was wealthy, and they, you know, his two friends turned tormentors were very aware of where he was coming from and his situation, and his wife was very aware of everything. And it's not because, and Job's not alone. Like, you look at all these people and what they went through, and they're very externally visible things. There's just like a little hint, a little waft of the internal stuff that no one would know if it weren't written down, right? That's not because that's the natural ratio of affliction in life. The natural ratio is the exact opposite of that. It's a manifestation of God's mercy, because if what was explained was internal, if Jesus came just demonstrating the internal stuff, and he said it openly, which he didn't do, if he openly described what he was going through as a person, do you think it would be easier to believe him or less easy? Like, suppose he was a super wealthy guy from privileged parents, and he just came preaching this message of internal goodness. Would anyone have listened to him? Well, if he went to the blind person and said, "I'm really sorry you're blind, and I care more about your suffering than you do. And I'm here to tell you that the Father loves you more than you love yourself. And he's going to leave you blind, even though he has power to heal you, because you'll be better off that way. And you need to trust him, and it will be well with you." Like, who would buy that book, right? Who would buy that book? Now, is that a more valuable message? Absolutely. Absolutely. The cross calls you to the heavier cross. And the heavier cross yields greater joy for you and for everybody you impact or you serve, even if they don't even know you're serving them. You can do greater good. So, and this is one reason why it's so hard to correctly judge people, because you require a heavy dose of God's discernment to see the private, hidden things that they're going through. And you don't know, like the guy in the wheelchair, you can see a person in a wheelchair and say like, "Oh yeah, they're in a wheelchair." But there's a lot of internal wheelchairs where people struggle with situations that God, in an amazing willingness to love us, these gifts to be worked, these things that can become strengths, these setbacks that can become the source of greater strength than we would have otherwise. As Jesus said, for the glory of God. Why was this man born blind? So that God could be glorified. All adversity is for that purpose. Which really is for the benefit of mankind, all people, but especially that person. Anyway, the things within are always greater of being, the things within are much more capable of being bigger than the things without. That's terrible grammar. But you get the drift. They can be much bigger, and they're more likely to be bigger than the things outside. It's like spiritual pain. These are very, very related ideas. We all have a limit of what we can go through physically before we die. So if I lit you on fire, or you lit yourself on fire, or someone else lit you on fire, there's a point where you experience so much pain that you would die, even though, like, your head's not cut off and you haven't died through lack of sustaining bodily function or impossibility of that. You die from pain, right? What your body can endure spiritually is much greater than what you can endure physically. But there is also a point where you would die through spiritual pain. So, as we interact with people, the reality is very few people are operating on more than baseline of what they could be in terms of spiritual suffering or physical suffering even. In fact, the spiritual might be even rarer than the physical, but who knows? The point is that some people will be carrying a massively larger load than is outwardly evident. And hopefully that fuels some compassion. But if you're one of those people, and you know who you are, and if you don't know, you'll know soon, because you'll treat other people, you'll project the goodness in your heart onto other people, and then they will immediately use that liberty to cause great harm to you. And you can't go through too many cycles of that before knowing, even if you don't want to know, and even if you don't want to believe it, knowing the evil that is human nature. But if you're one of these people that carries that, one of those burdens, a heavy burden that's not visible to others, no signal is ever lost, no good deed is ever wasted. And just like the sun shining on people and objects that do not acknowledge or appreciate it, there is still benefit. And there's benefit to all those individual things and people. And there's also the massively greater benefit of enabling a system where a few people can notice and can receive and can attain towards the great potential they've been given. And that, obviously we're moving away from the solar sun and into the point of the analogy, which is the Son of God, Jesus. So hopefully that's useful, and I'm going to get back to what I was doing.